Jennifer, I can't keep living this lie. Those words hit me like a physical blow as I stood in our tiny kitchen, my hands still wet from washing Jake's breakfast dishes. Michael stood there in his expensive suit. When had he started wearing suits that cost more than our monthly rent? Looking at me like I was something distasteful he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. Victoria and I belong together. We always have. She's offering me a life I deserve, a future I can't have stuck here with you and your constant struggles. The casual cruelty in his voice made my blood freeze. 7-year-old Jake was sitting right there at our kitchen table, his small fingers gripping his red crayon. So tightly, his knuckles had gone white. He was colouring a picture he'd drawn of our family, stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. How naive that seemed now. I remember thinking this had to be some kind of nightmare. Just that morning, Michael had kissed my forehead and told Jake to have a good day at school. He'd helped me zip up Jake's backpack and promised to be home for dinner. Now he was standing in our kitchen like a stranger, talking about abandoning his family like it was a business decision. "What about Jake?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's your son, Michael. He worships you." Michael's eyes flicked to Jake for maybe half a second before he looked away, like the sight of his own child was too much to bear. That's when I knew. This wasn't a moment of weakness or confusion. This wasn't even about Victoria, not really. This was calculated abandonment, and he'd been planning it for God knows how long. "Jake will be fine. Kids are resilient." The words came out rehearsed, like he'd practiced this speech in the mirror. Victoria's daughter Emma needs a father figure, and frankly, Victoria can give us both the kind of life we deserve. Not this. He gestured around our modest apartment with visible disgust. Our home. The place where Jake took his first steps, where we'd celebrated every birthday and Christmas, where Michael used to tell me he was the luckiest man alive. The same kitchen where he'd proposed to me 5 years earlier, getting down on one knee beside the refrigerator covered in Jake's artwork. Now he was looking at it, at us, like we were holding him back from his destiny. "You're really doing this," I said, and it wasn't a question. The suitcase by the door had already answered that. "You're choosing money over your own child." I'm choosing a future over struggling for the rest of my life," he snapped, and for a moment his mask slipped. I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, weak, selfish, always looking for the easy way out. "Do you have any idea what Victoria's offering me? A position at her father's firm, a house in Westchester, private schools for Emma? A real life, Jennifer. Not this paycheck-to-paycheck existence where you come home exhausted from the hospital every night and we argue about whether we can afford to fix the air conditioning." The air conditioning? He was leaving his son over a broken air conditioner that we couldn't afford to repair. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but Jake's small sniffles from the kitchen table kept me grounded in the horror of what was actually happening. "I've already moved most of my things," he continued, and that's when the real betrayal hit me. How long had he been planning this? How many nights had he lain next to me, plotting his escape while I dreamed of our future together? How many times had he tucked Jake into bed and read him stories while secretly counting down the days until he could walk away forever? "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long what? How long have you been sneaking your things out of here? How long have you been lying to Jake's face about being his father while planning to abandon him?" Michael had the decency to look uncomfortable for about 2 seconds. "Victoria and I reconnected at the reunion 6 months ago. We realised we'd made a mistake letting each other go. She's been divorced for 3 years, and Emma's father died when she was 2. Emma needs stability, and Victoria can give me the life I should have had if I hadn't gotten trapped here." Trapped. He called loving his wife and raising his son being trapped. 6 months. For 6 months, he'd been planning this betrayal while I worked double shifts to help us save for Jake's college fund, while I picked up extra hours on weekends so we could afford Jake's karate lessons because my son had begged to learn something that would make his daddy proud, while I went without new clothes and shoes and coffee shop treats so we could put aside money for family vacations we'd never take. "Daddy!" Jake's small voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Are you going somewhere?" I watched Michael's jaw tighten, watched him struggle with the last shred of decency he had left. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd realise what he was doing. Maybe he'd look at his son, really look at him, and remember that this little boy was half of him, created from love, deserving of protection and presence. Jake slid off his chair and walked over to us, still holding his crayon. His Superman pajamas were wrinkled from sitting at the table, and there was a small chocolate milk stain on the front from breakfast. He looked so small standing between us, looking up at his father with complete trust and adoration. "Are you going on a business trip, Daddy? Can I come with you this time?" Michael closed his eyes for a long moment, and I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment where he'd either remember what it meant to be a father, or prove once and for all that he was the kind of man who could look his own child in the eye and lie. "I'll visit soon, buddy. Be good for your mom." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily it made me sick. We both knew there would be no visits, no phone calls, no bedtime stories, or help with homework or showing up to school plays. Michael was erasing us from his life like we were a rough draft he was finally ready to throw away. Jake's face lit up with innocent hope. "When will you visit? Tomorrow? This weekend? Can I show you the rocket ship I'm building with my Legos?" "We'll see. Sport." Another lie, delivered with a pat on Jake's head like he was a dog Michael was leaving at a shelter. He grabbed his suitcase and headed for the door, his expensive shoes clicking against our cheap linoleum floor. Each step sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "Daddy, wait!" Jake's voice cracked with desperation as he jumped up from his chair, the crayon falling to the floor and rolling under the refrigerator. "I made you something." He ran to his backpack and pulled out a construction paper card he'd made at school. It was covered in glitter and had "Best Daddy" written in purple marker in his 7-year-old handwriting. Inside, he'd drawn another family picture and written "I love you" in letters that took up the entire page. Michael paused with his hand on the doorknob, and Jake ran up to him holding out the card like it was the most precious thing in the world. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought he might turn around. I thought he might realise that walking out that door would destroy the most innocent, pure love he'd ever receive in his life. The kind of love that makes handmade cards and counts down days until Daddy comes home and practices tying shoes just to show off new skills. Instead, he took the card without looking at it, shoved it into his jacket pocket and opened the door. "Michael," I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. "When Jake asks me why his father didn't love him enough to stay, what should I tell him?" He stopped in the doorway, his back still to us. "Tell him I'm giving him the chance to be better than me." And then he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stood there in his Superman pajamas, still holding one small hand out like his father might come back for another hug. The happy stick figures on his abandoned drawing seemed to mock us now, a fantasy family that had never really existed. "Mama?" he whispered, his voice so small and broken it made my chest physically ache. "Why doesn't Daddy want to live with us anymore? Did I do something bad? Was my card not good enough?" I knelt down and pulled him into my arms, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo and trying not to fall apart completely. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that his father chose money and status over love? How do you tell a child that sometimes parents are capable of abandoning their own blood without looking back? You didn't do anything wrong, baby. Nothing at all. Your card was perfect, and you are perfect. Daddy, Daddy made a choice, and it says everything about him and nothing about you. But even as I said the words, I could see the doubt in Jake's eyes. Children blame themselves for everything, and I knew that no matter what I said, part of my son would always wonder if he'd been enough. His father would have stayed. We spent the rest of that day in a strange bubble of grief. Jake kept asking when Daddy was coming back, if we could call him, if maybe he'd forgotten something and would have to come home. Every question was like a fresh wound, but I answered them all with as much honesty as a 7-year-old could handle. That night, I tucked Jake into bed and watched him cry himself to sleep, his small body shaking with sobs he was trying to muffle into his pillow. He kept asking when Daddy was coming back, when he could visit the big house, if Emma, the stepdaughter he'd never met, was prettier than him, smarter than him, better than him somehow. Mama, does Daddy love Emma more than me? The question broke something inside me that I didn't even know could break. Oh, sweetheart, love isn't about comparison. What Daddy did has nothing to do with how wonderful you are. But he chose her instead of me. He chose easy instead of real. He chose what looked shiny instead of what was genuine. And someday he's going to realize that was the biggest mistake of his entire life. Each question was a knife to my heart, but they also lit something else inside me. Something fierce and determined and absolutely unforgiving. As I sat in Jake's darkened room, listening to his uneven breathing as he finally fell into an exhausted sleep, I made a vow that would shape the next 23 years of our lives. Michael thought he was trading up. He thought he was leaving behind the struggling single mother and her needy child for something better, shinier, more worthy of his time and attention. He looked at his own son and saw dead weight, an obstacle to the glittering future Victoria was offering him. But he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Because while he was playing house with his new ready-made family, I was going to raise the most extraordinary man this world had ever seen. Every sacrifice I made, every double shift I worked, every night I stayed up helping with homework instead of collapsing into bed, it would all be fuel for the fire I was building. Jake would become everything Michael never believed he could be, and someday, somehow, Michael would realize exactly what he'd thrown away when he walked out that door. I just had no idea how sweet that revenge would taste, or how completely it would destroy the life Michael thought he deserved. The universe, it turns out, has quite a sense of humour about these things. 3 weeks after Michael walked out, Jake stopped eating. Not completely, but enough that his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called me at the hospital during my shift. Jake seems different, she said carefully. He's not participating in class, he's not playing with the other children, and he barely touched his lunch today. I found him that evening sitting in his bedroom, staring at a photo of Michael pushing him on the swings at the park. The same photo he'd shown me proudly just a month before, telling me how strong his daddy was, how his daddy could push him higher than anyone else's daddy. Jake, honey, you need to eat something. I'm not hungry, Mama. Maybe if I get skinnier, Daddy will come back. Maybe I eat too much and that's why he left. My heart shattered into a million pieces. This beautiful, innocent child was starving himself because he thought his appetite had driven his father away. But then something unexpected happened. Jake looked up at me with eyes that held a determination I'd never seen before. Mama, I'm going to be the best at everything. Math, reading, sports, everything. Then Daddy will have to come back because I'll be too good to leave behind. And that's when I realised Michael had accidentally created his own worst nightmare. For the next 5 years, Jake threw himself into excelling at everything with an intensity that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. While other kids were playing video games, Jake was reading college-level books I borrowed from the library. While they were watching cartoons, he was solving math problems that stumped teenagers. But the real twist came when Jake turned 12. Michael had sent exactly 0 birthday cards, 0 Christmas presents, 0 phone calls. Nothing. For 5 years, complete silence. Then, out of nowhere, a letter arrived addressed to Jake. Inside was a check for $50 and a note. "Happy birthday, son. Sorry, I missed a few. Hope you're doing well. Love, Dad." Jake stared at that letter for hours. I watched a 12-year-old boy process the fact that his father had just tried to buy back 5 years of abandonment with $50 and a generic greeting card message. "Mama," Jake said finally, his voice eerily calm. "He thinks I'm worth $50. "Jake, that's not $50 for 5 birthdays, $10 per year. That's what I'm worth to him." He took the check, walked to his bedroom, and taped it to his wall. Not to cash it, but as a reminder. That night, I heard him making a phone call I'll never forget. "Is this Princeton University? I know I'm only 12, but I want to know what I need to do to get full scholarship to your engineering program." The admissions officer probably thought it was a prank call, but Jake was dead serious. He'd decided that if he was only worth $50 to his father, he'd make himself worth $50 million to the world. What Michael didn't know was that his abandonment had created something he never expected, a genius with a grudge. By age 14, Jake had skipped 2 grades and was taking college courses online. By 16, he'd earned a full scholarship to MIT, not Princeton, because he decided Princeton wasn't prestigious enough for what he was planning. He wanted to build something so big, so undeniable that his father would see his name in the news and realize what he'd thrown away. But the universe had other plans. During Jake's freshman year at MIT, I was working a late shift at the hospital when I got a call that changed everything. It was Jake, and he was crying. "Mom, I saw him." "Saw who, baby?" "Dad. He was on the news. Some business award ceremony. He looked happy, really happy. He was with Victoria and Emma, and they looked like the perfect family. Emma had her arm around him, calling him Dad in the interview, and he was talking about how proud he was of her academic achievements." My blood turned to ice. "Jake, she's a year younger than me, Mum. Emma, and she's not even that smart. She's getting C's at some private school that costs more than your entire salary. And he's proud of her C's, while I'm here on a full scholarship to MIT because of my own merit, and he doesn't even know." That night, Jake made a decision that would define the next 14 years of his life. "I'm not doing this for him anymore, Mum. I'm doing this to him." The shift was subtle but terrifying. Before, Jake had been working to earn his father's love and attention. Now, he was working to destroy his father's world. By age 20, Jake had his PhD in engineering and had already filed patents for 3 revolutionary technologies. By 25, he'd sold his first startup for $40 million. By 28, he'd founded Chen Industries. Yes, he'd legally changed his last name to mine, erasing Michael's surname from his identity completely. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming, not even me. Jake didn't just build a tech empire. He built it specifically to compete with and destroy Michael's industry. Michael worked in commercial real estate development. Jake created smart building technologies that made traditional developers obsolete. Every contract Michael lost, every deal that fell through, because his buildings couldn't compete with smart technology, Jake was behind it. For years, Michael had no idea that the brilliant young CEO systematically dismantling his industry was his own abandoned son. The final blow came when Jake was 29. Michael's company was struggling. Victoria's father's firm had been hemorrhaging money for years, and Michael's position was shaky. They needed a miracle contract to survive, and that miracle came in the form of a $100 million government contract for smart building systems. Michael's company submitted a bid. So did Jake's. The night before the decision was announced, Jake called me. "Mum, I need to tell you something. Tomorrow, they're announcing the winner of the government contract. Dad's company bid on it. They need it to survive." "Jake, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm about to become the youngest CEO in history to land a $100 million government contract, and Dad's company is about to go bankrupt because they can't compete with my technology. You did this on purpose." "I've been doing this on purpose for 14 years, Mum. Every success, every innovation, every business move, it's all been leading to this moment. The moment when Dad realizes that the son he abandoned is the reason his life is falling apart. But the universe wasn't done with its twisted sense of humor. The morning after Jake won the contract, the morning after Michael's company lost everything, I was reading the news when I saw something that made my coffee cup slip from my hands. Victoria Richardson Chen, she'd taken Michael's name when they married, had filed for divorce. The article was brutal. It detailed how Michael's company had failed to secure the contract that would have saved them, how Victoria's father blamed Michael for destroying the family business, how Victoria had decided she couldn't be married to a failure. After 23 years of marriage, Victoria was leaving Michael the same way he'd left us, suddenly, coldly, and for someone with more money. She was taking Emma and half of everything Michael had left, which, after the business failure, wasn't much. Jake called me that afternoon, and I could hear something between satisfaction and sadness in his voice. "Mum, Dad's getting divorced. Victoria left him for some tech millionaire. Apparently, success is only attractive when you're actually successful." "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, empty. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but instead I just feel tired. I spent so many years building this empire to prove him wrong, and now that he's lost everything, I realize I never needed his validation in the first place. But that's when fate delivered the final perfect twist." 3 months later, Jake's assistant handed him a resume that would change everything. Emma Richardson Chen, age 29, was applying for an entry-level position at Chen Industries. Michael's precious stepdaughter, the girl he'd chosen over his own son, the girl who'd had every privilege handed to her while Jake clawed his way to the top, was now desperate enough to apply for a job at the company owned by the boy her stepfather had abandoned. "She has no idea who I am," Jake told me that night. "She's coming in for an interview tomorrow. The woman who grew up calling my father Dad while I spent 23 years wondering why I wasn't good enough is going to sit across from me and beg for a job." The irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. After 23 years of abandonment, after building an empire from nothing, after systematically destroying his father's world, Jake was about to come face to face with the daughter Michael had chosen over him. And she needed him now. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to interview her. I'm going to look her in the eye and remember that she had everything I was denied. And then I'm going to decide whether the son Michael abandoned is a better man than the father who walked away." The next morning, Emma Richardson Chen would walk into that boardroom, probably expecting her stepfather's connections to open doors, not knowing that the CEO interviewing her was the same little boy Michael had left behind all those years ago. The same boy who taped a $50 check to his wall as motivation. The same boy who'd built a $1 billion empire while his father's world crumbled. The same boy who now held Emma's future in his hands. Justice, it seemed, had a sense of humour after all. The morning of Emma's interview, Jake called me at 6 a.m. "I couldn't sleep, Mum. I keep thinking about what I'm going to say to her. Do I tell her who I am right away? Do I let her go through the whole interview first? Do I—" "Jake," I interrupted gently, "what do you want to accomplish here?" There was a long pause. I want to look her in the eye and see if she's anything like the father who chose her over me. At 2 p.m. sharp, Jake texted me from his office. She's here. Emma Richardson Chen walked into the Chen Industries headquarters wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Even after her mother's divorce, even after losing the family fortune, she still carried herself like someone who'd never truly struggled for anything. Jake had positioned himself strategically. He'd sent his usual interviewer home and decided to conduct this interview personally. Emma had no idea she was about to face the abandoned son of the man who'd raised her. "Miss Richardson Chen," Jake said as she entered his corner office. "Please, have a seat." Emma smiled nervously and sat down, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. "Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mr. Chen. I have to admit, I'm a little starstruck. Chen Industries is legendary in the tech world." Jake studied her face carefully. She was pretty in a polished, privileged way. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect posture. Everything that money and opportunity could buy. But there was something desperate in her eyes that hadn't been there in the family photos he'd seen over the years. "Tell me about yourself," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. "Well, I graduated from Vanderbilt with a degree in communications. I've been working in marketing for a boutique firm in Manhattan, but honestly, the startup world has always fascinated me. I think I could bring a lot of value to your team." Jake glanced at her resume. Vanderbilt, expensive private school, marketing at a boutique firm. Probably got the job through connections. No real achievements, no innovation, no struggle. Just a pretty resume built on privilege. "I see you've had some gaps in your employment history," Jake observed. Emma shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, there were some family circumstances that required my attention. My stepfather's business went through some difficulties, and I needed to be there for my mother during their divorce." Stepfather. Not father. Even now, even after 23 years, she couldn't bring herself to call Michael dad in a professional setting. Jake filed that detail away. "That must have been difficult," Jake said neutrally. "Tell me about your stepfather's business. What kind of difficulties?" Emma's composure cracked slightly. "He was in commercial real estate development. The industry has been changing rapidly with all this new smart building technology. His company couldn't keep up with the innovation and they lost a major government contract that would have saved them." Jake felt a surge of dark satisfaction. She was talking about his contract, his technology, his victory over Michael's incompetence. "Smart building technology," Jake repeated. "Interesting field, very competitive. What do you think companies in that space need to do to stay relevant?" "I honestly don't know much about the technical side," Emma admitted, "but I think it's about adaptation, right? Companies that can't evolve get left behind." The irony was suffocating. She was sitting in the office of the man who'd single-handedly destroyed her stepfather's company, talking about adaptation while having no idea she was speaking to Michael's abandoned son. "Let's talk about your qualifications," Jake continued. "What makes you think you're a good fit for Chen Industries?" Emma brightened, back on safer ground. "I'm a hard worker, I'm creative, and I'm not afraid of challenges. I know I don't have extensive tech experience, but I'm eager to learn. Plus, I think my background in communications could be valuable for your marketing team." "Hard worker?" Jake almost laughed. This woman had been handed every opportunity while he'd worked 3 jobs through college. Creative. Her creativity had been funded by trust funds and family money, while his had been born from necessity and desperation. "Tell me about the hardest thing you've ever had to overcome," Jake said, his voice carefully controlled. Emma paused, thinking. "Probably my parents' divorce. It was really unexpected, and watching my mother go through that was heartbreaking. She'd built her whole life around my stepfather, and when his business failed, he became this bitter, angry person. It tore our family apart. Jake's jaw tightened. Michael had become bitter and angry when his own choices finally caught up with him. The man who'd walked away from his own son without a backward glance was now suffering the consequences of his selfishness, and Emma saw him as the victim. "What about before that?" Jake pressed. "What challenges did you face growing up?" Emma looked confused by the question. I mean, normal kid stuff, I guess. School stress, social pressures. My biological father died when I was 2, but my stepfather was amazing. He stepped up immediately, treated me like his own daughter. I was really lucky. Treated her like his own daughter, while his actual son was learning to tie his shoes alone because Daddy was too busy playing house with his new family. "Your stepfather sounds like a good man," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral. "He was the best," Emma said warmly. "He never missed a school play or a soccer game. He taught me how to drive, helped me with homework, walked me down the aisle at my wedding. Well, my first wedding. That didn't work out either." She laughed nervously. "I seem to have terrible luck with men." Jake felt something cold and sharp twist in his chest. Michael had walked Emma down the aisle. He'd been there for all her milestones, while his own son had achieved everything alone. Every success, every graduation, every triumph. Jake had celebrated them with me, his mother, while Michael was playing the devoted father to someone else's child. "I'm sorry to hear about your divorce," Jake said. "Thank you. It's been a rough couple of years, honestly. First my parents' divorce, then mine, then having to find a new job, but I'm trying to stay positive. I know things will get better." Things will get better. She still believed the world owed her good fortune. She still expected life to eventually give her what she wanted, just like it always had. "Emma," Jake said suddenly, using her first name for the first time, "do you believe people get what they deserve in life?" The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, do you think the universe is fair? Do you think hard work and character are rewarded? Or do you think success is mostly about luck and circumstances? Emma considered this carefully. I think good people eventually get good things. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Bad people might succeed for a while, but it catches up with them. Jake leaned forward slightly. "What about children? Do children get what they deserve?" "Children?" Emma looked genuinely confused now. "Children are innocent. They don't deserve anything bad that happens to them." What if a child's father abandoned them? What if that father chose another child over his own biological son? Would that child deserve to be left behind? Emma's face went pale. Something in Jake's tone had shifted, become more intense, more personal. I don't understand the question. Are you asking about a specific situation?" Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. His city, the empire he'd built from nothing, while Michael's chosen daughter lived in luxury. "Let me tell you a story, Emma. Once upon a time, there was a 7-year-old boy who worshipped his father. This boy made Father's Day cards with glitter and construction paper. He practiced tying his shoes just to show Daddy how big he was getting. He counted down the days until Daddy came home from business trips." Emma sat frozen in her chair. One day, Daddy came home and told the boy and his mother that he was leaving. Not for a business trip this time, but forever, because Daddy had found a better family, a richer family, a family with a little girl who already had everything the boy had ever wanted. A father's love. Jake turned around to face Emma directly. The father looked at his own son and saw dead weight. He looked at his new stepdaughter and saw potential. So he made a choice. Emma's hands were trembling now. "Why are you telling me this?" The boy grew up asking himself what was wrong with him. Why wasn't he good enough? Why did his father choose another child over him? Was he not smart enough, not lovable enough, not worthy enough? Jake walked slowly back to his desk, never breaking eye contact with Emma. So the boy decided he would become worthy. He would become so successful, so undeniable, that his father would have no choice but to see his mistake. The boy worked harder than any child should have to work. He earned scholarships, built companies, created technologies that changed entire industries. Emma's face had gone completely white. Please stop. The boy became a man, a very successful man. And do you know what he discovered, Emma? She shook her head, unable to speak. He discovered that he didn't need his father's approval anymore, because he'd become something his father never was. A person who doesn't abandon the people who love him. Jake sat back down and looked directly into Emma's eyes. My name is Jake Chen. 23 years ago, my father was Michael Richardson, your stepfather, the man who walked out on his 7-year-old son to play daddy to you. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma stared at Jake like she'd seen a ghost, her mouth opening and closing without sound. That's impossible, she finally whispered. Michael never had a son. He never mentioned. Of course he didn't mention me, Jake said calmly. It's easier to pretend I never existed than to admit he abandoned his own child for a ready-made family and a trust fund wife. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand. He was such a good father to me. He loved me. He was always there. He was there for you because you came with money and status. I came with struggle and sacrifice. He chose the easy path. But he raised me. He taught me everything. He was my dad in every way that mattered. Jake's expression didn't change. And while he was being your perfect father, his actual son was learning to be a man without him. While he was helping you with homework, I was working 3 jobs to pay for college. While he was walking you down the aisle, I was building the empire that would eventually destroy his company. The full weight of the revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. You are the reason his business failed. You destroyed him on purpose. I competed with him fairly. His company couldn't innovate, couldn't adapt, couldn't compete with better technology. Just like he said, companies that can't evolve get left behind. Emma stood up shakily. I need to go. I can't. This is too much. Sit down, Emma. We're not finished. Something in Jake's voice made her sit back down immediately. You wanted a job at my company. Let's talk about that. You have mediocre qualifications, no relevant experience, and no particular skills that would benefit Chen Industries. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't hire you to clean our bathrooms. Emma flinched as if he'd slapped her. But these aren't normal circumstances, are they? You're not just another unqualified applicant. You're the daughter Michael chose over me. You're the living embodiment of everything he thought was more valuable than his own son. Jake leaned forward. So, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to offer you a job, not because you deserve it, but because I want to see what you're really made of. I want to see if 23 years of privilege has created someone with actual character, or just another entitled person who expects the world to hand them everything. Emma wiped tears from her cheeks. What kind of job? Entry-level, minimum wage. You'll work twice as hard as everyone else and receive half the recognition. You'll prove your worth every single day, just like I had to do my entire life. And maybe, if you're very good and very lucky, you'll understand what your stepfather threw away when he walked out on his son. Emma stared at him for a long moment. And if I say no? Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you walk out of here the same way Michael walked out on me. And you spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd been brave enough to face the consequences of his choices. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 23 years of pain, abandonment, and a twisted kind of justice that neither of them had seen coming. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "When do I start?" Emma started work the following Monday. I watched from my apartment window as she pulled up in her BMW, the last remnant of her privileged life, and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before getting out. Even from a distance, I could see her hands shaking as she gathered her courage to walk into the building where Michael's abandoned son now reigned supreme. Jake had been ruthless in his assignment. Emma wasn't working in marketing or communications like she'd hoped. Instead, he'd placed her in the mailroom, sorting packages and delivering coffee to executives who had no idea they were being served by the stepdaughter of their CEO's greatest enemy. "She's struggling," Jake told me after her first week. "Yesterday, I saw her crying in the supply closet because she couldn't figure out the copy machine. She's never had to work for anything real in her life." But what Jake didn't expect was what happened next. Emma didn't quit. Day after day, week after week, she showed up. She learned every task, no matter how menial. She stayed late, came in early, and slowly began to earn the respect of her co-workers, who had no idea about her connection to the CEO. 3 months into her employment, Jake called me with something I'd never heard in his voice before: uncertainty. "Mum, she's actually good at this. Not just the basic tasks, but she's suggesting improvements to our mail distribution system. She's reorganized the entire supply chain process and saved us thousands of dollars. She's working harder than employees who make 10 times her salary." "How does that make you feel?" There was a long pause. Confused? I expected her to quit within a week. I wanted her to prove that she was just another spoiled rich girl who couldn't handle real work. But instead, she's proving that maybe there's more to her than I thought. That's when fate decided to throw us the biggest curveball yet. On a Thursday afternoon in November, exactly 6 months after Emma had started working at Chen Industries, Jake's assistant rushed into his office with news that would change everything. "Mr. Chen, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your father." Michael Richardson stood in the lobby of his son's billion-dollar empire, looking smaller and older than I'd seen him in any of the photos over the years. His hair was grey now, his expensive suits replaced with off-the-rack clothing, his confident posture replaced by the defeated slump of a man who'd lost everything. Jake stared at him through the security cameras for a full 5 minutes before making a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Send him up." The elevator ride to the top floor must have felt like an eternity for Michael. 23 years of choices, 23 years of consequences, all leading to this moment where he would face the son he'd abandoned in the very empire that son had built from nothing. Jake was standing behind his desk when Michael walked in. The physical resemblance was undeniable. They had the same jawline, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to their shoulders. But where Michael looked broken and desperate, Jake radiated power and control. "Hello, Michael." Not dad, not father, Michael. The formal distance of a stranger. "Jake," Michael's voice cracked slightly. You've done well for yourself." "No, thanks to you." Michael flinched but didn't argue. He looked around the office, the awards on the walls, the city view, the obvious trappings of incredible success. And his face crumpled with what looked like genuine remorse. "I know I have no right to be here. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. But Emma told me she's working here, and I had to come. I had to see for myself what you've become." "And what have I become, Michael?" "Everything I never believed you could be. Everything I was too blind to see when it mattered." Jake walked around his desk slowly, deliberately. "Emma told you she works here. Did she also tell you who hired her? Did she tell you why?" Michael's face went pale. "She said the CEO was someone named Chen, but she never mentioned... I never thought..." Jake, please tell me you didn't hire her just to hurt me. I hired her to see what kind of person you raised, to see if she had any of the character you clearly lacked when you walked out on your own child. And what did you find? Jake was quiet for a long moment. I found someone who's working harder than I ever expected. Someone who's proving every day that maybe she deserves the father I never had. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He staggered backward and collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you and your mother. I know that now. I've known it for years, but I was too proud, too ashamed to admit it. I thought I was choosing security and status, but I was really just choosing the easy way out. Is that supposed to be an apology? Jake's voice was ice cold. No, nothing I say could ever be enough to apologize for what I did. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I'm here because my daughter, my stepdaughter, told me something that I can't stop thinking about. Which is, she said, you're the most brilliant, driven, successful person she's ever met. She said you've built something incredible, and she's learning more working for you than she learned in 4 years of college. But she also said you seem lonely, empty, like all this success hasn't filled the hole that was left when I abandoned you. Jake's composure cracked for just a moment. Emma said that. She's been defending you to me for months, telling me how fair you've been to her despite having every reason to hate her, how you've given her opportunities to prove herself that she never would have gotten anywhere else. She says you're a better man than I ever was, and she's right. Michael stood up slowly, looking directly at his son for the first time in 23 years. I can't change what I did. I can't give you back the childhood I stole from you, or the father you deserved. But I can tell you that walking away from you was the worst decision I ever made. And seeing what you've accomplished, despite me, makes me proud and ashamed in equal measure. Proud? Jake's voice was dangerous now. You're proud of me. You have no right to be proud of anything I've accomplished. You weren't here for any of it. You're right. I have no right. But I am proud, even if I forfeited the privilege of saying so 23 years ago. The office fell silent, except for the sound of the city, 40 floors below. 2 men, father and son, staring at each other across a chasm of hurt and regret that seemed impossible to bridge. Then, Jake did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a piece of construction paper, faded and worn from years of handling. The Father's Day card that 7-year-old Jake had tried to give Michael the day he left. I kept this, Jake said quietly. For 23 years, I kept the card you threw away. Do you want to know why? Michael stared at the card, his eyes filling with tears. Why? Because I needed to remember what it felt like to love you unconditionally. I needed to remember that once upon a time you were my whole world, and I was foolish enough to think I was yours. Michael reached for the card with shaking hands, and Jake let him take it. Michael opened it and read the 7-year-old's handwriting. I love you, Daddy. You are the best. I was never the best, Michael whispered, but you were. You were the best thing I ever had, and I threw it away for fool's gold. That's when the biggest twist of all walked through the door. Emma appeared in the doorway, breathing hard like she'd run up 40 flights of stairs. Her face was flushed, her hair dishevelled, and she looked absolutely furious. Stop it, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Both of you, just stop it. Jake and Michael turned to stare at her in surprise. Emma, what are you doing here? Michael asked. I'm here because I'm tired of watching 2 people I care about destroy themselves over something that happened when I was 7 years old, and Jake was 7 years old. We were children, and we had no control over the choices you made, Michael. She walked into the room and stood between them, looking back and forth like a referee in a boxing match. Jake, you've spent 23 years building this empire to prove you were worthy of love you already deserved. You've systematically destroyed everything Michael built to get revenge for abandonment. That was never your fault. You've won, you've proven your point. He knows he was wrong. But what now? Jake stared at her. What do you mean, what now? I mean, you've got everything you thought you wanted. You've got success, money, power, and the satisfaction of watching your father's world crumble. But you're still that 7-year-old boy waiting for his daddy to come home, and he's standing right there. Emma turned to Michael. And you. You spent 23 years being the father to me that you should have been to Jake. You gave me everything he needed and deserved. You can't undo that, but you can stop pretending that guilt and regret are the same thing as action. Both men stood frozen, uncertain what she was getting at. Here's what's going to happen, Emma continued, her voice stronger now. Michael, you're going to stop wallowing in self-pity and start being the father Jake needed 23 years too late, but better than never. And Jake, you're going to stop punishing yourself for not being enough when you were always more than enough. Emma, Jake started to protest. No, let me finish. I've been working here for 6 months and I've learned something about both of you. Michael, you raised me to be someone who doesn't give up on family, even when family gives up on us. And Jake, you've shown me what it means to earn everything you have through merit and determination. She took a deep breath. I'm quitting my job here, effective immediately. Not because I can't handle it, but because I'm starting my own company. And I want both of you as partners. The silence in the room was deafening. I'm going to build something that combines Jake's innovation with Michael's experience, and I'm going to prove that family isn't about blood or time or perfect circumstances. It's about choosing to show up, even when it's hard, even when it's late, even when you don't deserve another chance. Jake and Michael stared at her, then at each other, then back at her. You're both idiots if you let pride keep you from having what you've both wanted for 23 years. Each other. Emma walked to the door, then turned back one last time. The company is going to be called Richardson Chen Industries, because some names are worth keeping and some futures are worth building together. You have 24 hours to decide if you want to be part of it. And with that, she walked out, leaving father and son alone with 23 years of hurt and the unexpected possibility of something neither of them had dared to hope for, redemption. Jake looked down at the Father's Day card in Michael's hands, then up at the man who'd abandoned him. I don't know if I can forgive you, Jake said quietly. I don't know if I deserve to be forgiven, Michael replied. But maybe, Jake continued, we can figure out what comes next. For the first time in 23 years, Michael smiled at his son. Maybe we can. The abandoned boy and the absent father stood in the empire built from rejection, both finally understanding that sometimes the greatest revenge is learning to love again. And somewhere in the city below, Emma Richardson Chen was already making phone calls, building the bridge that would span a generation of pain and prove that some stories don't end with revenge. They end with restoration.